Hey guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed that breakout session. Hope there was lots of value in there for you. So now what we're going to do in this little segment, and I appreciate you coming back, is we're going to talk about a certain number of things around profitability and the like in terms of figuring out the best way to run teams, most efficient, and of course, bottom line. So admittedly, this is not going to be the shiny and sexy component of the presentation. This is way more in-depth, nuts and bolts. But absolutely necessary. It's kind of like the vertebral backbone of the business, and we need to understand it. So what we'll do is we're going to go through this presentation, same format as last time. I will probably come to a point where we'll have a few minutes for a Q&A where I'll give you a question. And then after I'm done and we're done our Q&A, then you guys will go to a 15-minute break before we start the wrap-up for the day. So hopefully we can pull that together in timely fashion. Okay, so let's start with measuring what matters to increase profitability. So first what we're going to talk about are the 4 ways that we can earn income. So if you look at this pie graph, there are 4 quadrants that are on the pie graph, and E we'll start with is employee. So an employee essentially is the opportunity where you are exchanging time for money. So when we first start, we've got lots of time. And we begin to invest in the business and do what we do. And ultimately, we're trading that time to make a living and earn revenue. Now, the challenge with that is that if you want to grow at all, of course, well, you can't necessarily increase the amount of time because that is a finite number eventually. And the exchange of value diminishes over time because you're doing more things for less money because you're just spread too thin. The second section is the S, which is the self-employed. So a lot of us are there, which is still that, we create a job, but we're still kind of exchanging this job for money. So we do tasks and we get paid. So different example would be in the first category as an employee, the job, let's say at McDonald's, is the person's job is to make fries. And they work a certain number of hours making fries and they get paid $15 an hour to make their fries. In the second, which is self-employed, it means you've got a few more jobs to do. And your job isn't like, here's 15 or 16 bucks an hour, but you're getting paid to do that job. So whether it's $100 or $500 or $1,000, you're paid to do that job. So again, there are limitations to that because there's only so many jobs you can do and only so much time available in the day. So where a lot of us are headed, and many of you might already be there, is to the B quadrant, which is the business owner. Now the business owner is where you've got people working for you. So when we get onto that right-hand side of the circle, what I'm really pointing at over there is leverage. So this is now where you've moved yourself away from being sort of the catalyst to the generation of revenue, and you've now structured systems in place that can do it for you. So you can do other things, and this is the whole point of why we generated a business in the first place. So the business, people work for us, we pay them salary to do a job which executes a certain task, which then ultimately turns around and allows us to continue doing more of what we do at a higher level and a higher dollar productive rate per hour. The highest and best use we could ever get to is where we become the investor. So obviously at that stage what happens is you're getting your money to work for you, which means you're at home, you can put your feet up. The investments that you've made in whether it be bricks and mortar, whether it be in other opportunities, venture capital, it doesn't really matter. Whatever you've put your money into is now bringing a return that is great enough to cover your life expenses, whether they be current or down the road or whatever you're planning on. So I would say that, ultimately to what Rich was saying in the last segment where he talked about, we all go into business to make money. That's ultimately kind of what the fuel is. Well, ideally I'd say we should all be striving or could be striving for that investor situation as the ultimate end goal, if you will. And that's because the other ones are building steps to get to there. So if we start as an employee trading time for money, the ultimate goal at the end is to have money for money. Right? Make sense? Okay. So your number one responsibility as a business owner is the financial health of your organization and of the team. So one of the things that I hear often, and maybe you guys have too, is that when people build teams, and if they're not completely functioning at their optimum in terms of profitability, because that's really what we're talking about, is you'll hear people talking about very, very high top numbers, high GCI, I remember hearing stories way back in the early days where I had people at that time making $1 million or something ridiculous, but their after-tax money was smaller than the single agent who didn't have a team. So the challenge with that is that that responsibility became more about feeding the ego than it was about running a business to fund your life. So one of the key things to sort of be mindful of as you begin to move forward into this new realm is that, we work in a very sort of ego-driven industry. Everybody's number one at something. Everybody has to feel, and many times, that the brag and boast form of marketing is the way to go. And yet we know that the public doesn't really like that. In fact, most of us don't like that. But the problem is we use other agents who appear to be successful in their work as our models. So, and that's fine, they can choose to do that. But the problem is when you start to peel back the layers of the onion, the layers of the team, and you find that what you've got is a dysfunctional unit. One of the books, a great book that I read, was called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, written by Patrick Lencioni. So if you want to remember that name and that title, it was a great book. The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team talked about that very thing, about financial responsibility, talked about the roles and responsibilities of each member of the team, all of which contributes to the overall high efficiency and productivity. And the reason it's so important is obviously we can imagine that if we are not financially responsible and financially healthy as a team, as a company, as an enterprise, we can't function. Not to mention the stress and anxiety that goes along with all that. On top of that, and I would say probably most importantly, is that our responsibility financially actually is to the support of those people that are on our team. So once you decide to make that leap from me to we and you begin to employ people, you now have a very large responsibility to make sure that that is sustainable. And to do that, we need to make sure that everything we're doing is geared towards profitability, supersonic efficiencies for sure, cutting out the fat and being lean and mean. So if I had to say one word that you could maybe take away from today's talk this afternoon with me, is I want you to think about maybe 2 words, would be efficiency, but most importantly, productivity. The idea of productivity is going to be paramount to everything because productivity drives revenue. And in a lot of cases, what we see is there are some teams who don't have expense problems, they have revenue problems. Other teams, they've got revenue problems, not expense problems. So this is why it's very important, although it's not attractive and not fun, you have to be into the numbers to kind of see that happening. Okay, so the next part of the conversation is around KPIs. So KPIs are known as key performance indicators, and these are the things that we measure to make sure that the performance of the team as a unit is doing what it's supposed to be doing and ultimately maximizing our profits. So if you have a look at that circle graph, you'll notice there's a bunch of sections that have been cut out, and I'm going to address each one of them individually and kind of give you a brief explanation on what that's all about. So if you start on the right side above agent commission, so the bottom half is agent commissions, but let's talk about the top part first. At the right, you'll see it says administrative compensation. So we measured before, and as I mentioned in the first segment, the idea is that your admin costs should be roughly 10% of your gross commission income. That's a typical standard model we see across the industry of all the people that we coach. It's doable and it certainly is attainable. So that's one thing. So that's a KPI, section 1. The second is marketing. Now I know that everybody likes to talk about their marketing and their platforms and whatnot, but we have seen in the past a lot of teams who have blown their budgets right there in the marketing. So they're spending far too much money on things that are not returning a return on investment. So with my coaching members, one of the things I like to do with them is I like to play red light, green light. So red light, green light is like the old game as kids, where you make a list of all the marketing platforms that you utilize or all the marketing outlets that you use, regardless of the medium, whether it's print media, social media, online, offline, doesn't matter. And then see if you can track, based on the deals you wrote in the current or previous year, what you can attribute to each marketing platform. And to be super strict, what you do is if there's nothing that's a direct return on investment on that particular activity, you got to consider getting rid of it, replacing it with something that's working, and or putting more money into something that is more effective. But marketing, just like admin compensation, should probably sit around 10% of GCI, just as a FYI. Anyway, Operating expenses. So what it costs to kind of run the show otherwise. So outside of admin and marketing, again, floats between 10 and 20%. Again, this is a metric to watch and measure, because the last thing you want to have happening is that things begin to escalate. So things in operating expenses could be things you use for equipment purchases, computers, laptops, scanners, lighting, camera work. Maybe it's going to talk about salaries beyond, of course, your administration. Maybe it's going to talk about things that you outsource. So your creative guys or your photography people and your stagers and your all these other kinds of operational expenses. That should float between 10 and 20%. And just for a moment, I'm going to stop on the top side of that graph, because the bottom half you're going to look at, you're probably looking at that and you see agent commission 50%. So this is probably the biggest aha moment that shifted the me to we concept, at least for me, that I'm going to hope to try and put into clear words for you, is that the one thing you have to remember is if you're going to run a team and you're going to talk about profitability, you have to make sure that you separate the amount of money you're paying yourself out from the team. Because otherwise, your income, meaning whatever's left over, so to speak, will skew the profit margin. So I'll give you an example. So people on my team, let's say buyer agent and whatnot, and let's forget about the admin costs because that's just the salaried costs. But let's say the agents on my team are all on a 50-50 split with me. Well, I too put myself on a 50-50 split. So that 50% of the revenue that I generate on my own comes to me and 50% goes into my team. You want to see the team structure as a standalone sort of third-party enterprise. Because you cannot use your own salary, your own wages to prop up the profitability of a company. You imagine Jeff Bezos of Amazon including his salary in the reportings on Amazon for profit, right? He has to take that out as a legitimate expense. So that's why, and I understand there's a variety of models between splits between agents and this and that and bonuses and overrides and whatever, but when you put it all through the wash, what we see more often than not is that it works out to 50%. So having said all those, now we return to the top half of that circle where we talk about net team profit. So after all operating expenses, after all marketing costs, after all admin, after all agent commissions and splits, you want to see your net team profit hover somewhere between 10 and 20%. Now, some people might think, wow, that's kind of low. But you have to remember, if you've already pulled your $100,000 salary out of the company or $200,000 out of the company, and the company still is retaining a profit of 10 or 20%, it means you've paid all of your expenses to operate, you've paid yourself as a salaried individual, and the company still holds 10 or 20% profit in its coffers. So if that makes sense, can you guys just raise your hand for me? God bless you. Thank you. Because that is a very muddy thing to explain. And it's very difficult for people to get their head around the notion that we're talking about something outside of themselves. The team is an entity on its own. It just so happens that you own the team. So hopefully that kind of makes it clear for you guys. And again, there's various split models across the board that we've seen, all kinds of variations, but ultimately it kind of bumps down. Ultimately it comes out of the end of the spout at a 50-50. Okay? Okay, so let's talk now about team profit drivers and those things that are destroyers. So, profit drivers that we talk about, number one, is following the metric percentages. So the metrics that I just talked about before on the previous slide, the 10%, the 10%, the 10 to 20, and the 10 to 20, and the 50, if you can constantly monitor and chart those metrics, that will keep you well within the drive to profitability. The other thing to monitor are your efficiencies. So that means things like the percentage of listings that get taken as a team, the percentage of listings that get sold as a team, the days on market as a team, how many people's hands touch the processes as a team. How long does it take to onboard? How long does it take to qualify? How long does it take to get people in the car? How long does it take people to get out into the field? How many houses do they see on average before they buy something? You see, the shorter we can make all those efficiencies, either the more people we can bring through the system and convert, or at least we're going to generate the benefit of having more time. Because if you remember, part of the reason that we build a team is to increase the quality of life we have by giving ourselves more time, either off or to work on the business, or to generate more revenue. Ideally, you'd like to do both. So as Rich mentioned, the way I set up my model now is that I love to work 3 days a week full-time doing real estate. I do 2 days a week doing coaching. I don't work weekends and I don't work evenings for the most part. But ultimately, if I can do my 50 or 60 transactions in our market here, everything is on the shoulders of my assistant so that nothing else gets touched. That's high efficiency and high profitability as a result. Okay? Okay, let's talk about some of the profit destroyers. One of the classic ones that we see all the time is that part of the draw that a team leader makes on bringing on an agent to the team. So let's forget about administration again because that's a salary position. But bringing on an agent is the fact that they like to offer up the idea of paying the agent's desk fees and the various splits with the brokerage, as well as some of the licensing, some of the courses, some of the this, some of the that. Well, the problem with that is that the team begins to cover too many of the expenses on behalf of the agent. And I would say one of the biggest kisses of death to running a team is that not only does the team lead and the team itself cover all the expenses, but sometimes the reason that these agents get hired in the first place, from their perspective, is because it's the team who's responsible for generating the leads. So now you've got a team leader who's setting up something to build. You got a team member who's joining, who has basically a takeout tray waiting for leads to be piled up. They've got hardly no expenses to concern themselves about. So my question becomes, how much skin in the game do they have? Next to none. And that's a model that's definitely a destroyer. Everybody on the team has to have an investment in the team. There has to be an investment in the success of the team, an investment in the systems of the team. It can't just be a free ride. That's how you create the churn and burn model, which we're not going to talk about today. In fact, we're not going to talk about that at all. So paying agent desk fees and splits. Second one is excessive percentages within the KPIs. So all of a sudden, let me go back to the KPIs. So you can see, so let's suppose you start blowing the brains out on marketing. Your administrator wants way more salary than they're supposed to. The agent commission splits have popped up to 60%, so now the team is actually taking in less money. So you can see how quickly that becomes, in fact, that circle probably starts to look more like a banana. Just saying. Then it's all counterproductive at that point, right? So beware of going beyond the KPIs for sure, because they can really sneak up without you seeing it. And once that starts to happen, it totally eats into the financial bottom line of the company or the enterprise. Okay, so now I want to talk to you about the cost per deal. So here's a rough calculation I want you to sort of run through your head, and this is strictly for argument purposes. But take the total cost of the team. So let's say you're at the year end, it costs this particular team in this model $400,000 to run the team. The team here did 100 deals. So that now on an average would suggest to me that the cost per deal would be $400,000 divided by the 100, which is $4,000 a deal. So it's a clean, like a quick and dirty way to calculate that number. But I know what people are going to say. That's why the slide beside it says, but. My deal didn't cost me that much. In other words, they just came in off the internet and I converted them after 3 houses. There's no way it costed $4,000. What people forget about is the genesis of this entire system, the genesis of the team, what it took year after year after year. So let's have a look at some of those things that can be added into the category that make up the cost per deal. So the cost to obtain that lead. Now, right now I realize that there's a lot of people who are looking at social media as the new silver bullet to lead generation within the industry. Industry standards are showing that the conversion rate of social online or web leads is roughly industry-wide about 2 to 3% conversion rate. So to me, it's felt like a complete needle in the haystack. So there's two things. If you wait organically for leads to come down, and sorry, we're not talking about marketing at this point, but I just want to make an example. If we wait for all these leads to organically come down our pipelines from Realtor.ca or from Roy LePage's feeds or from any other kind of websites, those are slower volume. We need to be exceptional at converting them. But if the industry average is only 2 or 3%, you can see that it's a very high volume set of numbers, but a very low return on investment. So then what happens is you get into other methods of obtaining online leads or lead generation, which are exorbitantly expensive. There's people who are paying hundreds of dollars for every single lead, generating thousands and thousands of dollars in expenses for leads. Well, if you can't convert, if you can't keep up, and you can't qualify, you're in trouble, right? So this is why when you average it out, the cost per deal starts to go up because it takes so many to make up the average. Make sense? Okay, administration. So now we're talking about having someone administer the deal. So think of how many people's hands, let me back that up. So if you don't have a team, you know how many tasks that you need to do in touching that deal to take it from the day it was written, from the day the conditions or subjects were removed, to the time it closed, all the way through. And you bill out all that time to your company. Now add in an administrator who has to do the same thing. And not just for one deal, for 25 deals, for 35 deals. There's expenses attached to that. And I think at the end of the day, anything to do with the staffing is a serious expense that needs to be chartered across the whole platform from beginning to end, because that will also be a reflection of your efficiencies. Because again, too many hands means you're not being efficient. The third thing, which tends to get forgotten, is the cost of brand creation. So if you think about it, you could be in business for 5 years, 10 years, 25 years, doesn't really matter, but you have created a brand across all platforms to the world that has taken years and years and years of expense, of time, of money, of brain power, of different resources to create that very opportunity that we call a lead. It didn't just show up overnight, but that's one of the first ones that gets totally forgotten about. And if it's taken that long, it shouldn't be forgotten that quick, right? It's a very important aspect. And the brand is so important in terms of what that represents, because if you're looking at the cost per deal, if you're looking at a volume of leads coming down, and your brand is really, really important to you, especially if it's all about quality of work, then the obligation is even more so on us to provide a great experience for even the people who are not A clients yet. And that's why we like to always say, treat them all as A clients until they disqualify themselves. Next comes the team support. Well, now that you've built out this machine, you're now paying a multitude of people to touch these things. A multitude. So again, you've got client care, you've got an agent, you've got this person, you got that person, you got a deal secretary, you got trade records. Like anybody who touches that thing is now on there from a team support perspective, and it's costing some big money. So just start to add those things together from that list, and you will see quickly how the cost of generating a deal goes up. Now I see someone says, can you please put back, you want me to put those back up on the screen, right? So let me go back to I'm assuming you're talking about the cost per deal. So let me go back to the first one for you. So first is obtaining the lead. The second is the administration of the lead. Brand creation, and team support. Now, I see another one up there about putting the 7. Can you put the 7 back up? Hold on. I can do anything. I have the clicker. Where's the 7? Is that old? Okay. Hang on, kids. Repetition. Here we go. Okay, so let's talk about reporting profit. Okay, so this is what we touched on. The right way to report profit is separating your commissions from the team. That's 100% the rule of thumb. You have to pull your revenue out of the team report to be true in terms of your profit reporting. Let's look at the wrong way. So obviously the opposite is true, including your team leader's split in the bottom line. So in other words, you cannot have your team lead subsidizing the profit margin of the team. The second thing is the team leader pays for the losses of the team. So what that means, and I've seen this over and over, is that you will get team leaders that what they'll do is when the team coffers are getting below zero, meaning the operation account has been drained, the team leader starts to subsidize. Oh, it needs 10 grand here, needs 10 grand here. You see what I mean? So now he's taking his own personal money, which is after the team, right? He's pulled it from the team, and now he has to put it back in. So that's the wrong way. And the last thing is I want you to think about this as a concept, especially for those of you who have more than one agent. The bottom one says not charging manager fees for services. So maybe you're saying, what the hell is that all about? What does that mean? So what this means is that if during the build out of a team, you yourself have to act as a manager, trainer, shoulder rubbing, keep going team, rah, rah, let's go, that normally on a larger scale becomes a paid position. So if you're doing that, you want to allow in the budget an expense for that very position. So if somebody there is going to be paid $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year on a larger team to be the manager of that team, but currently you're doing it, you need to take out the 30 or the 40, 50,000 that you should be paying yourself for that role. In other words, every role in the organization, whether it's being filled by another individual or by you wearing that hat, needs to be billed out for that work. Because otherwise, you're pretending. You're doing management work, ultimately, which is what you'd put into place, but guess what? You're not billing for it. Okay? All right. So now let's talk about thoughts on succession planning. So one of the things that I've noticed over time that's been a constant big challenge within the industry is that most people don't think about succession. They don't think about the exit. We just go and we go and we go and we go and we go like, little mice on the wheel, right? And then one day something happens and we quit, or we leave, or something else shows up, or whatever. So let's talk about the thoughts around succession, because that's really, really important. So the comment that we read is this: every day, if you're not selling your business, you're buying it. Every day, if you're not selling your business, you're buying it. And what's it worth to you? So, you own the expenses of the company. You own the revenue of the company. You own the equipment, the systems. You own it all. So the question really becomes, on a day-to-day basis, are you earning and investing, or are you spending and expensing? You see, if you start to think of it strictly as if you're going to be selling your business, you will be very different in your mindset in terms of how you operate it. Let me explain in this next slide. If you operate your business daily as if you're planning to sell, your chances of selling it will increase dramatically. So I'm going to ask you a question. With a show of hands, when I finish the question, I just want to know if this has ever happened to you guys. Have you ever met with a seller before who is saying to you, oh, Bill, my house must be worth a whole lot more because you see this tap over here? I just installed this tap and it cost me $1,200. So I'm sure the value of my house is way higher. Oh, and by the way, this is Benjamin Moore paint. Okay. And the question is, does water come out of that tap? Yeah, okay, good. Just checking. So to that example, what I'm trying to say is, I would ask the client this following question, which is why I'm going to ask you now as a business owner. If you were planning to sell the house, would you have spent $1,200 on that tap if you knew you were selling it in 2 weeks? Well, most of them would say no, of course not. So the idea is to think like that for yourself, meaning that everything you do to operate your business on a daily basis, make your decisions around the idea that you're going to be selling that business within the next 12 months. And ask yourself, if I'm going to sell this in 12 months, would I make this decision? Would I make this investment? Would I incur this expense? Is this going to make my business more saleable or less saleable? Because it'll do nothing if you turn to the next potential buyer of your business and say, do you realize I just spent $1,200 on a tap? You should be paying me more money for my business. Makes no difference. Follow me? I'm sure you guys have all had people who've said those kind of statements, right? Yeah? Yeah, okay. But it is Benjamin Moore. It's beautiful, I know. Balboa mist, it's a lovely color. Anyway, okay. So, what impacts the value of your business? So number one, the quality and organization of your database, past clients, advocates, and strategic alliances is the first and foremost. I can't stress enough the importance of centralizing your database. That task alone, as much as it may be daunting, is probably the most important fundamental step you can take, not only as a single agent, but absolutely as you're moving forward to hiring an assistant or bringing on team members. It must all be in one place, and that's for saleability. Because you can't have names in your Google Drive, you can't have names in your top producer, your exact, your sphere, your phone, on a napkin. That's not a system where you can establish a value to have something to sell. Not to mention from an efficiency standpoint, you have to be able to take the system and show somebody. So we can't basically take our napkins and say, this is how I do my work and what are you willing to pay me for my business, right? The next thing is, what impacts the value is the brand. So your brand. So what is the awareness and reputation of your brand in the marketplace? And think about this. Your brand, in the eyes of the market, represents the last experience that those people who worked with you had. So when they look at your brand, I want them to feel that warm and fuzzy. I want them to feel that pride, right? That's what you're striving for. You're striving for an instant recognition and an association that snaps them right back to the moment they work with you, right? Yeah, if they got good napkins, I might be interested. Yeah, for sure. Ones that fold over with a pattern, those are good for rollerball pens too. Anyway, the other thing is your website. So your individual URLs, your landing pages, all your visitor traffic, your SEO, all the things that are your assets that help to promote and market, right? Those things are super, super important. The rest of your online assets, so your social media following, your engagements, your platforms, what you own in that virtual world, another asset which impacts the value of your business. Your business systems. So how many people can pull out a procedure manual and say, hey, Bill, here are the steps 1 to 10 on what you do to process a new listing. Here's what you do to renew a listing. Here's how you cancel and do a relist. Here's what you do from a post-sale perspective. Here's what you do for database management. Here's what you do for video creation, right? If you can show me that in one thing, that is hugely valuable because now I don't have to go all over the place looking for your napkins. Just saying. Value of the other assets, if applicable, would be anything else that the company holds as an asset. So maybe it's equipment, desks, furniture, maybe it's an actual bricks and mortar building, right? Anything and anything. The idea at the end of the day is primarily to make sure that anybody that you're going to be selling the business to maximize your value, like staging a house, is that somebody could be dropped into your seat as captain of the enterprise, and they could have all the material that they need to run that ship, to take it from here to there, to know how to defend itself, to know the destinations, to know the products, to know the people, to know the outcome. And when you hear the word systemization, so one of the things maybe I should clarify for you guys is that when people get coaching at the beginning, the one thing that I hear over and over is this idea like, Bill, I just got to get organized. Like, if I could just get organized, it would be fantastic, right? And I get that, because I was that guy too 20 years ago with whatever. The idea around it is, again, around the centralization of a database, because everything that should go on in your business should, in fact, happen within that database. That's where organization comes from. Organization comes from the structuring. A system is simply a series of checklists. So if you know what to do with a new listing, if you know what to do with a new buyer, if you know what to do with a closing, if you know what to do with all those things, then write it down on a piece of paper. Because as you build a team, what is most important is you want to have your teammates be accountable to a checklist. They don't need to be accountable to their brain. God knows mine doesn't work that well anymore when it comes to that. I need a checklist, right? It eradicates the margin of error down to a very, very small number. And here's the best thing about the systemization. A quick example before I wrap up and get us to a question and answer. So for example, when in my office, when I used to finish up a sale, in the time between the deal would go firm to the time it closed, the sold sign would stay on for X amount of weeks, maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And at that time, my administrator would dispatch the sign guy, who's my father-in-law, and he would go out and get the sign, retrieve the lockbox, and bring it back. This was all pre-COVID, right? But notoriously what happens between the time that happens and closing is that we get the call from the buyer agent who says, I want to book a showing. It goes through my front desk, they go ahead and book it, and they confirm with lockbox because they assume it's still there. Then the agent gets there for the showing, and guess who gets the phone call that there's no lockbox and my people are waiting and it's raining, and what the heck kind of business do you run? Yeah, us. So instead of me turning to my front desk and saying, you guys should have asked, or my assistant and saying, what's up? It's a sign, it's a trigger for you to improve your checklist. So we now go back to our checklist, and now when the sign comes down, the lockbox no longer does, so that all the directions stay status quo. So what happens, you start to look for things like that in your day-to-day that get screwed up as the opportunity to add to a particular checklist. And then what happens is people in their respective positions who follow the checklist perfect it. And what happens is that adds to your client experience, that adds to the structure, that lessens your stress, it makes everything clear for your teammates, and guess what it does for your business value? Brings it up here. Because now everything is looked after, every fine detail. Even as Rich said, talking about, creating great client experiences, those can all be structured and scheduled. And for all the orange personality types who want to resist structure, let me just tell you that your freedom that you so badly seek in this business lies just on the other side of that structure. I promise you. I'm a green, but my second color is orange, so I totally understand that. Okay, so we've talked a lot. I've talked a lot. So we've got a few minutes left now for some Q&A. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you one question, like we did the first time, and put it up into the chat where you guys can put your answers and see what everybody else is kind of saying, if you don't mind. So my first question would be, given where you are right now with your business and what we've just talked about, my question to you guys is, do you feel you are truly profitable? So let's just fire in the yes or no. So remember we talked about not including your revenue, all the expenses, proper ratios. Let's just say, are we in fact profitable? Yeah, you guys are doing awesome. Okay, yeah, well done. So I see a good number of yes, but not enough, or no, not yet, or yeah, look at you guys. You guys are rock stars. Always room for improvement. Yeah, 100%. So what I want you to do after this day is I want you to dive deep into your numbers. And like I said at the outset, this is not a sexy exercise, people. This is not the fun part of running a business, but is absolutely the most important part. And what I want you to find are the areas where you can now say that those things I'm spending money on are no longer. If they're not producing a result that's generating revenue, we need to adjust that. The other thing is, if you are profitable, check to see if you're falling within those parameters of the KPIs we talked about. Are you profitable by 10%, 20%? Are you taking out your revenue? That's what we want to make sure of. Now remember, what you do with your portion of the revenue is all the stuff that's tax applicable, meaning you got to pay your own income tax. And there's a whole other gambit about conversations around now that we're allowed to incorporate and that sort of thing. So it's a very different conversation, which we should probably have at a different time because we're not accountants, but there's some good meat and potatoes in those conversations. But my biggest thing is I want you to sort of begin to be able to be aware of your profitability. And the last thing I would ask you guys now, just to put in the chat, is if you can think of one thing in your business that would help your profitability, what would it be? So maybe it's cutting expenses. Maybe it's you need to generate more revenue. Maybe it's you need to bring on more people. Maybe it's that you have to have better accounting practices, right? Knowing your numbers, 100%. Better quality leads. Yep. So again, that's a great one. Better quality leads, that's the genesis, right? So what it also means is you need to become a better qualifier so that you can burn through all the shitty leads and get on to something that's going to translate into money. Did I just say that out loud? I'm sorry. Look at you guys. Better, yeah. Beautiful. No more napkin accounting. Very good. Very good. Unless it's a nice napkin. We talked about that. More freedom. So again, you see what I'm trying to say is at the end, all these answers are fantastic. If you set up the structure, the team structure, set it up in a profitable way, you can enjoy all the things like the freedoms, like having people specializing in their jobs, like knowing that you're making a profit just by turning on the lights and going to work. But being behind the ball is not motivating. It's not motivating. So I want to take the opportunity to thank you guys for the opportunity to have this chat. I really, really appreciate the chance to be here in front of you and share whatever knowledge I can. Think about your company assets, meaning your own personal company assets. You're welcome. And think about where you can benefit by either adding or deleting, right? Keep it lean and mean. And if I could say one word for the whole year, like I said in the first session, productivity. Put your hands on things that are going to be productive and revenue generating. And honestly, get rid of the rest. Do them, dump them, or delegate them. That's the rule. Do, dump, delegate. Because if you guys are all worth a couple of $100 an hour as team leads, but you're making photocopies, you are the most expensive $200 photocopy an hour person I've ever met. And we need to replace you. You're fired. Anyways, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much, guys. It was a pleasure to chat with you. Hopefully you got some value out of this particular session, the unsexy numbers bit. And thanks for tuning in.